Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Zenway podcast. My name is Zenway, I'm going to be your host, and on this podcast we talk everything about life, career and tech. Today I have a very special guest. She, similarly to all the guests in the past, has done quite a few things in her life. And in this very particular episode, literally I'm excited because we're really going to talk about all three aspects, right? Her life, career, and also a little bit about tech as well. I learned quite a bit from Pin in the past a couple of months, really, from everything from ranging from a professional angle and also from a personal angle as well. Pin, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. Just recently moved to the UK to be on the show.
Thank you, Zen. Great introduction. Makes me stop and think about, whoa, those expectations were set quite high, and how do I really, introduce myself? But I'll just say, I'm Pin. I am a connected health, a health tech enthusiast. I'm somebody, who's doing this because, I decided to make my life a mission-driven life. And so, I've been on an interesting journey to hopefully make little bits of the world better than before. And through that, actually, I'm also on a journey to just meet really interesting people. All sort of with a similar focus on impact. That's obviously a really broad, high level introduction. But just get back professionally. Then I was, I guess, most recently, up until last year, the CEO of a Silicon Valley digital brain health company. Prior to that, I had spent a lot of time in the rest of the healthcare ecosystem. In MetLife, the payer side of the healthcare industry, as well as in Medtronic, the medtech side of the piece of the puzzle as well. And prior to that, I actually started my career in banking before I pivoted into healthcare. So I'm sure that's going to be another conversation. And I am a mother of two girls, 9 and 5, and grew up in Singapore, the US, and now in the UK. So I think we can pause right there. But
Yeah, you've mentioned around wanting to kind of meet more people with impact driven kind of I guess at least approach to life, and wanting to kind of make whichever part you are in a little bit more meaningful and probably in a better place than you found it, right? I find that really really interesting as well, because as I look at your career, you rightfully pointed out like, hey, you started it out in finance, right? But there was actually one part of your career that was pretty fascinated by. You spent about 5 years really just being in the impact space as well, I realized. So maybe we can talk about that a little bit. But maybe let's start with finance, right? Because typically speaking, stereotypically speaking, it's Wall Street, it's very cold, cut and dry, capitalistic in nature, right? But you had a really high-flying career with Citi Group in the US. What was that journey like? And did you always wanted to be in finance, at least probably in the initial phases of your life, right?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one because I would say, maybe if I may make such a statement, I'd say the answer was no. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. But as you may be aware, Zen, in many parts of Asia, and I know certainly out of Singapore, often you're driven into a couple of different paths only, right? There's
Yeah.
fixed definition of success. So, I took one of those in that sense. But having said that, it was a really, really good journey because for me, Citi Group was foundational. I was fortunate. I got into a leadership program, just to be clear, right? So the caveat. But I thought, while I was in corporate banking, the company was really good with people development, with talent, not just with the leadership group that they were working with, but by showing us how the rest of the company was managed. how people were assessed, how seniors were assessed, how we should decide how to pay people. So a lot of my foundations around how you grow talent, how you compensate them, all of those things which impact every company. I got my foundations from, and they were a really, really good group of people. So I really enjoyed my time there. But yes, you're right, which is why I think after about 8 to 9 years, I realized it probably wasn't for me for life. So
Right.
hence the
Was
change.
there was there like a, I guess, defining moment, or maybe there was a moment in time where you I guess that kind of like cemented the thought that you kind of have to maybe make a pivot in your career, because it sounded like it's many years in the making perhaps, right? But I was just curious in terms of like, were there, different kind of learnings across the time, or maybe a defining moment that helped you realize that, right?
I don't think there was one defining moment. I think sometimes in life you make rational decisions, right? But then there's also the gut feel.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I had that sort of gut feel that while I was enjoying myself and the people I was working with, it somehow didn't stir me enough. And I knew that. And I think what I did was I like taking little experiments in life. So, the first time that happened to me was while I was still in New York. And so I switched, departments, thinking maybe it was a department to see if something else would excite me. The company was very good. They moved me. Whenever I put my hand up, I got moved a couple of times. I still felt that way. And I said, hey, maybe let's change regions. So I said, can you send me
That's
back to
what brought you
Singapore?
to Singapore, right?
That was what brought me to
Yeah,
Singapore.
yeah.
And they did help me find a role in Singapore. And again, great team, great boss, learned a lot. But I spent about 2 years in that stint. And after, changing either departments or changing regions a couple of times, I kind of realized there was enough data points to tell me that perhaps I should look at something else and I should start exploring again. So it was a bit of a journey, but yeah.
Right. And what was that, I guess, exploration journey look like? Because I'm on a career break, right? And as you know, on this career break type of journey, sometimes it gets messy and is literally open book, right? I tend to, probably draw a parallel with, open book exams. That's probably the most scary type of exams, because it could be literally anything, and sometimes that scares people, right? So I was curious in terms of like your discovery and your exploration journey. What does that look like? What are different, I guess, curiosities that you may have that led to the next path that you took, right?
Yeah. So, I'm gonna say, the way I've done it is whenever I felt like that, I would dip my literally as best as I can dip my toes into different things to try it. So it becomes more than just theoretical. It becomes more than just researching online, saying, "Oh, would I like to do this or would I like to do that?" It's hard. It's hard. So you don't always get opportunities to try things out formally. But you get as far as you can. So just as an example, in this case, at that point in time, and I've done it a few times now. Maybe at some point I'll settle on something, but that point in time was the first time I thought about a major pivot. So I actually did three things. So I said, okay, one, perhaps it is not the industry, it's not banking. Maybe it's the company. So I actually went out, applied for jobs, and interviewed with other banks, okay, to see how I would feel. And then two, I picked another industry. I'm not going to name it, but I picked another industry and I said, hey, maybe it's just a totally different industry that I'm still interested in, but maybe that's what it is. And so again, I applied to a couple of roles in a different industry and tried it. And so on. So the thing is, as a combination, I would go through some of these interviews and just not be that excited still, which was a data point, right? The negative side, right? The push, sort of. But what's interesting was I was sitting in the waiting room of one of my final interviews in this other industry. For some reason, the head of the business felt he could make me wait for 45 minutes. So
Whoa.
I got a bit bored. I
Right.
actually out in those days where there were still magazine stands and
Uh-huh.
I wasn't reading on my phone. So I went to a magazine stand downstairs in the building, and it was Time magazine, and on the cover was a story of Muhammad Yunus, the Nobel laureate who had coined the term social business. I believe he coined the term social business, but he was one of the real pioneers in social business. And the article was about his company's partnership with Danone, the
Yeah.
yogurt company, the water company. And it really was about how they use business for good.
Mm.
How it wasn't just about grants necessarily, and donations, which is necessary in our world, but that there was a middle way where you could put the principles of self-sustainability, of some small profit with doing a lot of good. And that I just devoured that article and read it to the point that when I went into my interview, when the interviewer finally showed up, I was really distracted thinking about it. Needless to say, I think at the end of
Yeah.
that interview, it was quite clear that I wasn't very interested in that job.
Right.
There was no turning back from there, right? So, and I went to
Yeah.
pursue, basically, I went to get my MBA at Berkeley specifically,
Hmm.
for this reason. We can talk about that separately. So
Yeah.
it's, for me, it was, I tried things out. I had negative feedback from some, and then I had a real positive vibe from something else, and that together told me.
Mm, right. Yeah, I think that's the perfect example of really just. I think in another conversation that I had with someone else was really just talking about curiosity, right? And how that would actually lead you to really just you know path that you may not expect yourself to take. And in this case, really because you allowed yourself to be open and let curiosity let you, it eventually led you to take an MBA, right? And I guess that's a good segue to the next, I guess, about 5 years of your career in terms of like being in social impact and entrepreneurial and things like that, right? So in terms of what you learned during your MBA for this space, and the I guess the 5 years, what did you see and what did you learn about this space itself? What's so interesting and enticing? Was it what you thought it was?
Yeah. So yeah, it was about 5 years, I think, not counting, but
Right. I
I
mean, I looked at this on your LinkedIn. That's why
counted.
it counted for us.
Have you counted?
Yeah, it counted
Not
for
that it
us.
was,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, not that it was that long. I mean, meaning,
Yeah.
it's actually because it's just been so exciting, right? That
Yeah.
counting the years. So yeah, no, out of those, I suppose 5 years, two were, I think, during my MBA, and as I mentioned
Mm.
earlier, I count those 2 years because I specifically went to Berkeley
Yeah.
to switch into a career of social impact, right? And my
Mm.
learning started from that very day because, just as a bit of context, I was co-chair of the Global Social Venture Competition, one of the pioneers in social business plan competitions. I was in net impact, and also I think importantly, I during my 2 years there, I didn't just do a summer internship in the middle of the 2 years. Every semester, I took on one or two unpaid projects with companies or individuals in
Mm.
this space, so that I could experience, as I was saying earlier, so I could get hands-on, get my, just get experience about different aspects of social impact, whether it was working with one or two impact businesses, trying to get through the challenges they had, or it was in social impact measurement, which is really, really important, right?
Right.
So I've done a lot from of sort of projects, as well as in roles and in jobs after that, including starting my own social enterprise. I would say what was validated, and that wasn't surprising, is that there are proven ways for which one could try to tackle social issues in a way that's not purely dependent on grants. And
Mm.
I think that gives me hope about the space. And since then it's been about 12 or 13, 14, 15 years now, clearly not counting. The space has moved a lot, right? So I think those principles were sound, and family offices now investing in social businesses, so on and so forth. What was maybe something that I hadn't expected specifically is the people. um it's Throughout all those times, I found that the people I met in this space were always genuine,
Mm-hmm.
just very authentic about who they were, about getting to know you, about what they were doing, authentic about them seeking help when they needed help, authentic about reaching out and offering help when they think you might need help. And it's a very tight-knit collaborative community. And I use community in a very broad sense.
Mm.
Um, and I think that was what really struck me coming from other industries and having interacted with people in other industries, is that the people was what was sticky about it.
Right.
Um, I'm in healthcare now, which is obviously an industry with impact. So I'm not out of it, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
obviously out of the formal social entrepreneurship space from that perspective. But when I had to decide whether I would switch out of it, that
Right.
was what held me back for quite a while, because I didn't want to leave that kind of people.
Right.
Um, and actually, that has stuck with me. And even now, obviously,
Mm.
I'm still in an industry of impact, and I meet a lot of people like that. I'm not saying I don't, but that is now one of my criteria when I look at where I would work, in which company or with who. I really think about whether or not I enjoy working with these people. And I think that has brought a lot of happiness to my life, selecting who I'd like to work with. And that really came from the days when I was just surrounded with so many of them. And I realized that it did impact my happiness.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's extremely profound. I think I had the opportunity to volunteer with an NGO that my friend was working with. We are like good university mates, right? And he runs a kind of like an NGO to train and migrant youths in Malaysia that didn't have the opportunity to learn English and also IT skills, right? So they were displaced because of war, because of they're refugees here, and they came to Malaysia taking on service industry roles, right? But they are not citizens of this area, so therefore no education opportunity. And every time I go in, to kind of give some advice or to just have some discussion to kind of share with him and understand what their problem is, they always run into resource problems, right? Because as you mentioned, it's always dependent on grants. And the one thing that I realized that they cannot have is high level talents, because they cannot pay people to have a livelihood to want to tackle on this kind of social issues. So people like you and I, for example, are out of luck, because we need to still be responsible to our families and to our own livelihood as well, and our own well-being. But we are very passionate about the issue, but we can't have those kind of salaries, right? So when I first encountered the concept about social impact and things like that, with him, he was really trying to change the entire business model of that NGO into a social business, right? And I find that super amazing, simply because it allows that middle ground that you mentioned. And in fact, I think that is actually what kind of propelled me to take on my role, trying to kind of departure from Accenture into thoughtful, where I was trying to answer whether we can do good and do well at the same time. So I think I'm very hopeful about the space, and hopefully we'll be able to see more of those kind of examples as well in this region. So after I hear you saying that that was something that you hold quite dearly, and it must be a difficult decision trying to kind of pivot away. Was there something that told yourself that perhaps you maybe a different lens, or the accumulation of the learning, that you decided that it's time to kind of move on, right? What was that thought process like when you needed to kind of move into health tech after being so involved in the social impact space?
Sorry, you saying what sort of like how did I arrive at my decision
Yeah, because
to
you said that you
which
were
yeah
at a point where
yeah
you needed to decide to move away from
yeah.
social impact, right? And it was because of the
So
people, it
actually,
was reluctant. Yeah.
yeah. So
Mm.
actually, this was my answer, because I think when I decided to move away, it was because the external circumstances weren't quite right yet in
Mm.
Singapore for the kind of funding needed, and so I
Right.
knew I had to move away, but I didn't know what to move into, and so that
Mm.
exploration actually was what led me to healthcare, because the industry itself inherently has impact. The question was more, well, what role do I play? I mean, it wasn't my background. And clearly, it wasn't a social business, right? It's a highly profitable business for many, many, many companies.
Right.
And so that was how I ended up in healthcare innovation, because
Mm.
it allowed me to think about existing unmet needs, right? Which is what a lot of social impact companies do, and then complex needs really, and how are you going to solve for them? So that combination of the innovation part of healthcare, and that's how I ended up, I guess, choosing it.
Right,
um,
right.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and it was I saw that you started your journey with Medtronic around 2012, and and I think it also mentioned that you you decided, I mean, you've leveraged a lot of like design thinking and lean startup kind of methods, right? I think the medical space is known to be a little bit more conservative, right? What more kind of like a medical device company that perhaps needs the level of scrutiny and also the level of precision to be able to experiment. It sounds I guess expensive and also perhaps dangerous as well, right? So what was that journey like, trying to kind of propagate that kind of a different kind of, I guess, ways of working into Medtronic? What were they interested in, and what was exciting about that journey?
Yeah. So you have a few questions there.
I'm sorry
But
about that. But yeah, we can
the
start with,
opportunity
yeah,
that
yeah,
if I missed something, let me know.
yeah.
So, let's start first with what they were looking for, right?
Mm,
I was in the business model innovation team at Medtronic, and Medtronic has very, very high quality, life-saving devices. I hope I'll never have to meet one of those one day, but if I do, it's a brand that I trust, right?
right.
The challenge though was that they grew out of the US and Western markets where these are clearly reimbursed, and so they didn't quite have that sort of formal reimbursement in most countries in Asia. So the question becomes, short of this uber wealthy market, how do you really get these devices into the hands of people who need it? Hence the business model innovation. So they were very, very interested in it getting to more people. And obviously, as a profit-making company, that obviously was good for their bottom line as well. But they were really, really interested in access. Um, um, how did the team do it? Look, I think that the thing I'm going to say, and I think that this comment probably applies to most innovation teams, right? Which is, um, you don't go in thinking you're going to change the company, right?
Mm, yeah.
99.9% of those employees have been steeped in a certain culture,
Mm-hmm.
and the business has been run a certain way, and
Yeah.
it's running well, which is why they have profits and enough money to set up an innovation team.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't go in with the expectations to kind of change their mindset. I mean, the way it started is through small, well-controlled, de-risked experiments. It doesn't mean the experiments are not experimental, but de-risking it typically means either you go out into a pocket, a geography that maybe the business doesn't have a lot of presence, a lot of reputation yet, or you run an experiment with the right principles, and maybe without the brand name being in your face, right? So there are many ways to de-risk experiments, and so that's where you start, and you're very, very clear about the proof points that would ultimately be beneficial to the business. So that's where you end up in a bit of a win-win spot, because you get to experiment, right, with relative freedom, but you don't get pushback yet because people are nervous that you're doing something very, very differently. That's how first you get to some of your early proof points. But then it's going to take time. It's just time, right? You have one proof point, then you have the second proof point, and then you have the third proof point. And then, sometimes leadership changes and all of that gets chucked aside for a couple of years, right? So it's very different from a startup point of view, because you just
Mm-hmm.
move, right? You break, you prove, you hopefully scale, and you get out there and you make a name and you say, hey, look, we did it, right? In in a large corporate like that, you have to give it some time, because others, you have to slowly and thoughtfully change others' mindsets with the proof points you have, and by showing that you do benefit their business and their jobs and their KPIs, right? That's the way you have to do it. So I think in the case of Medtronic, to give you a real simple example to make it tangible, was one of my earliest projects was working on a digital sort of personalized coach for people living with diabetes. I mean, it's everywhere these days, but this was back in 2011, 2012, right? Based on Medtronic's continuous glucose monitor data.
Mm,
Imagine, it gives you a
right.
minute by minute readings. And so when we did that, no one had ever done that in the company, and the company was obviously making a really good business out of the devices. So the digital component of it was brand new. So we built something. We run a few experiments. We closed some small pilot deals with hospitals to show that people would use it. But I would say that didn't move very much mainstream into the business until at least 4 to 5 years later. Even then, I was not in the team already. But these things seep through bit by bit. A new leader comes in, they see some of this, they pick it up a little bit, they keep working on it. And years later, we did see something in the market. They had acquired a digital health company along those lines. And so ultimately, I was actually really thrilled. It happened. Your first reaction was, wow, no, I was there at the beginning, and nobody was all that open to it. But then you think about it, and I said, hey, wow, you know what? This, at some point, some version of this made it to market, and people are benefiting from this combined digital and device solution. This is great, right? Hopefully, I believe I seeded some of that somewhere years earlier. So it's a very long answer to your question, but I do think it does take patience, and you don't change a large corporate overnight, and shouldn't expect to.
Yeah, definitely. I'm reminded of I guess some of those positions that we were called to support during my consulting days. Like for example, a newly formed chief digital officer office, right? Those are new organizations, entities, and they have literally, like what you said, they have to go to all these different stakeholders that were successful, are successful, and you really do not hope to change them over time as well. But being able to kind of see some of this version of your effort to roll out to the market is definitely super exciting. In terms of
Can I add
yeah,
one thing real
yeah,
quick? Just
yeah,
just the last thought on what I just said, which
yeah, yeah, yeah,
is somebody might just say, hey, but there's so much to be done in healthcare. We cannot move,
yeah,
slowly. So that's not what I'm trying to say, right?
yeah,
I think the experimentation has to be fast enough, because you have to get to the proof points quickly enough, right? When what takes time is getting it absorbed into a business, formalized,
yeah,
institutionalized, legalized, all of those things. So the key thing I was going to say about those setups is, whether you're looking to start such an innovation team, or you're looking to get into one, is to take a hard look at the setup, because that team needs to have enough the right sort of structure, and the right to enable it to have the freedom to experiment like a startup,
right,
right? You don't want to have your hands tied every step of the way. Then you're not operating in a
right,
nimble way, right? So you need to make sure that setup can afford you that speed.
right,
And to temper expectations with very thoughtful steps to get it out into
right.
mainstream business.
Yeah, you almost have
So
to have the two speed kind of approach, right? So one
yes,
speed is
you do.
basically right. Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
you need to have people who can
yeah.
deal with both speeds.
And be open that the second speed is gonna be slightly more messy, right? Because they probably can't deal with the mess that is involved in the process as well.
Yeah.
Since we're so knee deep into the health tech discussion, I think it's worthwhile to really just talk about some of these questions that I have kind of lined up later. But I think let's bring it forward, right? Like you've done the innovation part of things for many years, including with Lumen Lab as well, right? Which also focuses on the innovation and so on. What is, I guess, what's the most exciting innovation or technology on the horizon that perhaps has the potential to maybe change our lives or the quality of our life, right? That you have seen after being involved in so many years in health tech, right?
Yeah, this is a big one. So I'm not going to go down the path of picking a specific technology, right? Because that might get quite narrow in terms of its application or disease area. I think what has huge potential and that really excites me is data-driven personalization. Um, you know, I think healthcare has to get personalized and really personalized for a couple of reasons. One is pretty obvious, right? From the science and the clinical perspective, to get towards precision medicine, right? You have the exact right therapy for you. So that's I think pretty obvious. So I won't spend too much time talking about the benefits of that. But the other aspect, personalization, is ease. Ease. You know, I've done a lot of firsthand interviews with patients of different with different conditions. And you know, when you talk chronic conditions, let me be clear. And when you talk to them about dealing with this the long-term complications and all that, what pretty much everybody says is, hey, listen, I know what I need to do. You know, my doctor has told me 10 times. You know, my kids tell me that. You know, so annoying, right?
Yeah.
But it's so hard. But it's so for 1,000 reasons, it's so hard.
Yeah.
And that's why I say that the personalization is key, because if we can make it easy, you can fit healthcare and the changes they need to make into their lives, into bite-sized pieces that are easy to absorb, easy to digest. Um, um, then I think we stand a chance at um, helping change behaviors. And when I say behaviors, it's not just about wellness and walking, you know, another 2,000 steps
Yeah.
and preventive health.
Right.
You know, behaviors in complex patients as well, right? People who need certain kinds of rehab. Uh, you know, heart-related conditions that require to eat a lot less sodium, for example. These are all behavior. This is behavior change. You don't just rely on a pill, right?
Yeah.
And so you know, when we can get data, not just from say real world clinical trials and digital trials, but data just from your habits and how you live your life, and you put all of that together into a picture of the whole person, right? This person with type 2 diabetes is very different from that person with type 2 diabetes. Their
Yeah.
lives are different, their habits are different. How can we make the right clinical therapy for them work for them? How can we nudge them at the right times that won't annoy them,
Yeah.
that won't make them dismiss you after the third attempt, right?
Yeah.
I think if we get that right, those algorithms right, we can have a lot of impact in healthcare.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree, right? Because at the end of the day, I mean, we were talking about like major depressive disorder in our line of work, and we were talking about how do we actually help them to improve. And one of the conversation that came up was really that we need to know how they're feeling, right? We need to know how they're feeling and logging those data and stuff like that. You know, obviously there are some devices that allows you to kind of really kind of correlate what your mood is, but the other one option is really to kind of get the patients to manually, or the clients to manually enter what they're feeling. That act itself is a major chore for major depressive disorder people, because they literally do not feel like doing anything. Something as simple as that is a major chore for them, and they're going to be turned off. So similarly, like, you know, in the conditions that you mentioned, there are so many things that requires us to understand how their lifestyle is. And I realized that, you know, with the advancement of, you know, different kind of technology, like for example digital imaging, or, you know, AI, to be able to analyze different situations that are in to provide context, I think that's going to be a major step up. Because if you think about the diets, right, I'm not, as a patient that is already going through so much, I'm not gonna key in the app in terms of what I ate, you know, in terms of like how many steps I take. It almost have to reach a point where it's a little bit more passive, and, you know, taking the data as easy as possible from the patients, without being creepy, or, you know, like you say, annoying to them as well. And I felt like that's hard to do, because, you know, it requires so much more context and continuous monitoring for us to be able to make it so personalized, right? So what has anyone close to cracking that in terms of really just being able to kind of just have that rich context to personalize that, right? Because to personalize meant that you need to understand the person really well without being annoying and manual data entry, right? Because a lot of the things I've seen requires a lot of manual data entry as well.
Yeah, so I think there are two aspects to that, right? Which is one, to your point, the technology will improve such that we can passively take in data,
Yeah,
okay, with the permission of the individual,
of
obviously.
course. Yeah.
That's going to move. But I think the other bit, which is, you know, I don't know if the right term is, you know, behavior science or not. But I'll give an example without naming names. You know, there are so many what do you call them? Chatbot coaches of sorts,
Yeah.
right? Some done better than others. So
Yeah.
I think in my own experience anyway, the best example I can give of the appropriate nudging, even if
Yes.
some manual entry is required, um, is when this particular app somehow learned how my day goes and what my habits are like. So, I would get, say, a question pop up. Actually, in a moment that was where I was open to answering it.
Mm.
I don't know how they did it, but I do remember at that point when I was testing it out, I was thinking, "Oh wow, I'm actually not annoying." But they also kept it simple. So instead of, say, to your point, there aren't sensors yet that could track how much water you drink in your food or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I'll get the question just very quickly as I pick my phone up to do something, be like, "Hey, did you have 2 glasses of water this morning? You said you would, right, or whatever." And
Mm.
sorry.
Right.
So one is, it asks me questions at the appropriate time.
Mm.
It only asked me one question because I was going to do something else anyway. But
Right.
it made it so simple. I had one out of three choices to pick from, right? Yes, I did, or no, I didn't, or I don't remember.
Mm.
It's
That's
got to
it.
be one of those, right? It's maybe
Yeah.
I don't remember, right? Or I don't want to tell you,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
Point is, so this is what I mean by, sure, and I'm very optimistic that the right technologies to sense and to passively get data will get there.
Yeah.
But instead of only waiting for that, I think there are ways we can use principles
Instinct.
in
Yeah.
behavior science and all that
Yeah.
to nudge,
Mm.
at the right times. If your phone is with you all the time and can
Yeah.
see your habits, there must be some smart data scientists who can program this into it reaching out to you only at the right times.
Right. Yeah.
Not when you are worked up and angry and your volume is up, I'm sure your phone
Yeah.
can hear you, right? Like, just as an
Yeah.
example, just
Yeah.
that it finds you at the right moment,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I was
right?
thinking like I mean as you're mentioning about this as a wacky idea in terms of like, you know, we all go, online shopping nowadays, right? What if we work with, e-commerce people in terms of like, if this person is starting to buy a lot of like stuff that they shouldn't buy, like for example, like, high sodium potato chips or something. we could use those information to pair, some habit forming stuff, could be pretty powerful. uh,
Yeah, yeah. No, it's
yeah,
exactly defining moments, right?
yeah, yeah.
And that's
Yeah,
really
I'm a
key. I mean,
strong believer in just in time information. Yeah.
yeah, no, I mean, actually, that was something I uh learned actually out of my days in social impact.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was spending a lot of time working with people at the base of the pyramid, right? The bottom, don't like to use the word bottom, but in terms of, a dollar a day or however you want to define it, right?
Mm-hmm.
People that many of us want to help, but actually we don't relate to them. We
Yeah.
simply don't.
Mm.
We lead different lives. And that experience actually uh, uh, taught me a lot. But one thing it taught me was, you want to get these messages on clean water, sanitation,
Yeah.
stuff like that across. You also have to find them in the right moment and deliver the right messages. And I think that lesson applies in healthcare. It's a difficult,
Yeah.
complex social issue, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, I guess the other, you mentioned something that I guess, we've been working on. I mean, I've been working on quite closely for the last 3 years in terms of preventive care, right? I'm very genuinely curious about this. In terms of preventive healthcare, everybody says that it's important, everybody knows it and stuff like that. Have you seen any example where we know it is effective, right? Have you seen any examples where it's gonna really just make people find the people in the right moment and make a actual change? Like, none of us is gonna say, oh man, it's too late, we should have done something earlier, right? In terms of general healthcare approaches and things like that, right? Because I felt like we've been talking about preventive healthcare for forever, but it doesn't seem like it has made the dent. I guess generally speaking, if you look far back enough in history, it has improved, but it just didn't feel like the preventive healthcare or preventive care movement has made some progress, significant progress, if you will, right? So what's your view on the state of preventive healthcare?
Yeah. Well, this is another big question. So
Yeah.
um I agree with you. It has moved. At least we're talking about it now. Um you know, I think again it's gonna take, I think, efforts on two fronts. One is some of what I talked about earlier, which is, how do you make this easy? Because we know the
Mm.
knows. How do you make it easy? That's one question.
Right.
Because ultimately we're all very busy individuals, and preventive care is a long term return for which you see no impact of your actions in the short run. So
Mm.
and it's just human. So how
Yeah.
much are you gonna invest in it?
Yeah.
Unless you're a bit of a QS person, right?
Yeah.
Qualified self person. So while we need to really push on that front, uh, the partnership has to come in at sort of the population health level, so the payers, whether it's public or private, and obviously mostly public. But those those policies in any country have to come in. Uh, you know, uh, um, how do you think about uh, to intentionally use the word incentivizing your citizens
Yeah, I was gonna
uh,
say that in
stay
seems like
well?
incentivization. Yeah.
I think ultimately you need to have that coupling of with that. It's
Yeah.
not just an individual. I
Mm.
don't think that's going to work. I do think you need the right sort of benefits plans in place
Right.
uh, to get people to do that. Because
Right.
I mean, we've seen even with the advancement of technology, right, where there are companies now that can, where through say a blood test, uh, uh, predict um, uh, at what age you will have healthy life years. I find that
Mm.
really powerful, right? So if
Yeah.
I take this blood, and I actually have taken this blood test, but let's just say if I took this blood test and my results told me that, oh, I would have healthy life years until 73.
Mm-hmm.
uh, versus for my someone of my profile, it should be 81.
Mm.
That's a whole 9 years shorter, right? Eight
Yeah.
years shorter, right? And but it's a few decades away for me. So ultimately, I'm not going to be jumping on this every every day trying to fix it. So, which is what I'm trying to say is, I think the technology will have to advance. It will make a difference because I think information is very powerful. It can really empower. But after the empowerment stage, for people to take consistent action,
Mm-hmm.
there has
Right.
to be quote unquote a return
Right.
of sorts, right? And that has to come in with, I think, more. I don't like to use the word governmental because not all countries operate like that, but
Yeah.
some have a higher level
Mass population
support.
level. Right. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
such that it's almost normal to be doing these things,
Mm.
preventative things, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Options out in like in say like Singapore where I come from, right? Around with the hawker centers, right? How much sodium, how much sugar,
Mm.
all of these things are beginnings of that, right? So that you make it easy, the options that are out there are healthier than before, right?
Understand.
How,
Right.
how how do we get there? I mean, there's a lot
Right.
more to long ways to go, but I
Right.
think it has come down to that as well.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, this whole conversation just made me feel like social sciences will be even more important, right? Like in terms of like social psychology, behavioral science, as you mentioned, to
Yes.
really change behavior. I think that is the core of it, right? If you can't change people, then no matter how good the technology is, it's gonna be challenging, right? Um,
I'm hopeful
yeah,
because I feel like a lot of this has been applied in mainstream
yeah,
marketing. I mean, look at the
yeah,
advertising and marketing industry,
yeah.
right? You know when to approach you with the right messages. So
Absolutely, I'm a
can
victim
we
of this. A
apply
victim of
like
this.
we have the talent,
Yeah,
right? So can we apply some of that in
yeah,
healthcare? Like we don't have to
yeah.
completely reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, we should definitely talk to the e-commerce people. Back to my potato chips idea. Anyway, I mean, I wanted to kind of move the conversation along to a little bit more, I guess, along the career aspects, right? So and we spoke about your experience being a CEO, and this CEO role is literally the top 1% of I guess the jobs, right? What does it take to be considered for a CEO role?
uh, I was thinking about that a little bit, and
Yeah.
um, I think it goes down to, in my mind, a real simple, like one word, which is
Mhm.
traction. Um, um, it's one could come up with a matrix of skills and hard skills and soft skills, which very important. I'm not dismissing any of that.
Yeah.
Uh, but ultimately, to make that role, it's about those in higher power wanting to put you in there. It's not a vote, right? It's not a vote
Mm.
by the everyday employee. So ultimately, it comes down to whoever is a panel of people, individuals who are responsible for picking the CEO,
Mm.
and they go by traction. That's really what they can go by. They're not sitting there staring at your resume. They know of you. They've seen you work. If not, they've heard of you work from their close network. So I think it's the traction, and obviously, maybe the accompanying word with that is presence.
Mm.
Then how do you presence know? Because if you're doing great work, but you're not putting yourself out there, then your presence, I mean your accomplishments wouldn't be as easily recognized and quickly recognized as well. Because
Mm.
typically when somebody, when the panel needs to put in a new CEO, it's because it's time. And it's time because something usually
Most likely.
negative
Yeah. Yeah.
has happened.
Right.
So therefore, it's usually not that it's a rash decision, but it's probably a relatively quick decision when that needs to happen. So I think it's the attraction and it's the presence.
Mm. Right. I always enjoy my conversation with you because, you bring a different lens to it in terms of being pragmatic as well, right? Even though you've been a CEO yourself, and a lot of times the stereotype the CEOs are very visionary and sometimes lacks pragmatism, but you bring that pragmatism, right? I can expect you to really be quite hands-on and, in your journey as well. I was wondering in terms of like, what are some of the maybe like unexpected things you had to learn or had to handle being a CEO that you didn't expect you needed before?
Uh, yeah. So I think that, yeah, to your point, you're right. I think if you look at the literature, that there are a lot of things that a CEO is responsible for, and which challenges a CEO needs to solve. I think those you can sort of easily sort of find literature on.
Mm-hmm.
I think that maybe the couple of things that I maybe didn't uh expect would play such a big role. Not that I didn't
Mm.
expect them at all.
Right. Yep.
One is building culture.
Mm.
It's talked about a lot, company culture, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And key people officers and so on talk a
Yeah.
lot about it.
Culture
Uh,
eats strategy for breakfast, so on and so forth, right?
yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
they'll say that and these chief people officers will say, their job is to make sure that that the leader or leaders build that culture, right? It starts from the top.
Mm.
So I think building culture, one, I think I didn't realize how tangible it was, as in how it really impacts productivity and morale, and everything that matters, right? And trying to
Yeah.
put out something in the market. So I think just to see the close relationship between uh, culture and what everybody produces on
Mm.
a daily basis. So I think that how tight that was. And then, the second half of that is um, building it. You know, if you come to a point in time where you have to shift, adapt, or change the culture, how do you do it?
Yeah.
Meaning who's responsible? Is it just the CEO? Is it the executive leadership team? Who's in there? Um, who can you loop in to help push for that? Um, how do you do it? And I think it's a combination of, again, soft and hard practices, right? Soft meaning is lead by example,
Mm.
the leadership team, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Hard meaning um, how do you ensure certain behaviors, for example, are in appraisal forms, if they exist, right, or processes or in conversations, that you don't only talk about your hard KPIs, that behaviors are
Mm.
talked about, for example. So when you really have to tackle it and you have to make a change,
Yeah.
that's when it gets hard, right? If you go
Mm.
into a company and the culture is great.
Yeah.
You go into it, culture isn't so great. You say to yourself, I'll either deal with this and then leave after a few years, or I
Mm.
can try to change it. But when you want to try to change it, I think that's when it gets really complex, and it's very context driven. Who's in there today? What's it like? What have they experienced? What have some of the key individuals experienced in their previous jobs, in their past lives, and are they
Right.
open to this? How do you change their minds? So I think one was building culture. This the second the second lesson is drawing boundaries.
Mm.
I always know that I wasn't very good at drawing boundaries from in terms of I give a lot to work. But I think that CEO experience taught me that I really didn't know how to do that.
Mm.
Because, like, as a CEO, ultimately, especially of a, earlier stage startup, you have to deal with everything,
Yeah.
and anything that's not easy for anyone else to do, even though it's in their scope of responsibility, lands on your table anyway at the end of the day.
Mm.
So, when the day is done, or you think it's done, and everyone else thinks it's done, it's not done because you're left with everybody else's problems.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you can keep working. You can keep working because after you solve three problems, you realize there's two more, and
Yeah.
three more, and one more, and you just go. And you know, when you don't know how to draw boundaries and say, hey, you know what, it's time to one, rest, two, create space so you can think more clearly. That ultimately impacts your performance as well because it's so easy. Actually, it's easy. It's rather thoughtless to get into a cycle of do, right? You just hop on the treadmill when you wake
Yeah.
up. Hopefully, you hop off and don't injure yourself when you go at night. And so when I say drawing boundaries, it's not just, oh, it's my work-life balance. Oh,
Mm.
now it's time, to meet my kid at the bus and do some homework. Yes, that's really important. But boundaries also meaning, within the day, within the work day, do you take a bit of time out for even just 10 minutes to, I learned later on that I would do that. Take like 10 a.m., go and walk out in the condo grounds in Singapore, barefoot on the grass. It sounds very
Mm.
hippie, but not just to be in a different environment, to then
Yeah.
just stop and say, I'm not going to think for
Yeah.
just 5 to 10 minutes. And then, when you come back to your desk, somehow like the clarity comes,
Mm.
and so I think drawing boundaries, even within the workday,
Yeah.
is really, really key. And I that taught me that I didn't know how to do that.
Mm.
It's a lesson I've learned, but a very valuable one.
Wow. Yeah, that's extremely valuable because like not many people talk about the boundaries you have to draw within the day itself because you get. I mean, I've been in that position, right? To in terms of being in a senior role, and you just get sucked into it, and everybody wants your time. Essentially, your role is to give people your time, and sometimes that's that's not sustainable, right? So you need to really find a way to kind of process that, as well. Um, I think kind of like it's a good segue because it became quite personal in terms of like what you've just described. I wanted to kind of hop on to even more fun questions. Uh, I wanted to kind of maybe do this one, right? I'm quite curious as well because I think during our conversations, you came across as someone that's there's a lot of introspection and reflection. I think you're very self-aware, and I think that's why I think I resonated quite well with you. So I thought that this conversation it's pretty interesting, which is what is there a person, book, podcast, media resource that has profoundly influenced your outlook on in life, right, and career. I know that you mentioned about that Time magazine article, uh, but is there anything else that kind of like I guess really changed your perspective in life, right?
um so yeah, so the Time magazine article is really about sort of direction, right, and
Mm,
kind of what matters, so that's
yeah.
important. um you know I, I wouldn't say there's like, one podcast or, one person or one article that uh has helped completely just change my outlook
Mm,
on life, or what kind of a person, professional or otherwise, I would like to be. But I'm going to just name him here. There's been one person
yeah.
who's accompanied me on quite a lot of this journey.
Right.
Um, in very simple ways. And okay, this person is Tony Estrella. I think you may know him.
You've
Uh,
you've mentioned about him before, and I went on to kind of find his podcast as well. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. No, I first professionally interacted with him
Uh-huh.
at Lumen Lab. He was one of the
Yeah.
early, very, very early team members that set up to actually run the healthcare innovation aspect of Lumen Lab. And later on, he was on my board at Sponix. And so he's
Mm.
been a colleague and friend this whole time. I call him out because um, as a friend and later on formally as a CEO coach at one part of my career, would chat and I'll get on the phone and I'm thinking I have these three things I want to talk to him about, and he would always stop and just say, "How are you doing?" You know, just like that, and then that just makes me stop and think, um, you know, you know that feeling, right? Too
Yeah.
well. Um, so that's one, just simply by just saying, and that's taught
Yeah.
actually me to ask others sometimes and just be like, how are you doing?
Right.
Not to talk
Right.
about how are you doing? And when you get to
Yeah.
that, you get to the core of the person.
Right.
And sometimes when you help that person
Yeah.
along,
Yeah.
they can better solve their own problems
Yeah.
as well. And it's not just about the problems,
Mm-hmm.
right? But also just in more tangible ways.
Yeah.
When he was sort of coaching me,
Mm.
he didn't just do a typical, okay, coach, let's get on the phone
Yeah.
every 2 weeks or once a month.
Yeah.
He actually would do things like pull in others, early stage CEOs into a very
Mm-hmm.
small group to have discussions, because he would say, you guys know each other's problem probably more deeply than I was.
Mm.
Please talk about it, right? Or you bring in somebody who's maybe succeeded in that aspect as well into very small group conversations. I think what I'm trying to highlight is um, the to not forget the the person behind all of this.
Mm.
To
Yeah.
always connect with other people, not necessarily other CEOs or
Yeah.
other advisors or other mentors, whatever their
Uh,
titles and labels are, but to remember, always go back to who you are as a person and
yeah.
always taking care of the person.
Person.
So I've taken that with me,
Yes.
and like I said, with others I work with, whether they're a peer, above or below me, formally in a hierarchy,
Right.
I remember to do that now, and I think it's really, really important. When
Right.
you nourish the person and you make sure the person knows how to thrive and can thrive,
Yeah.
other things generally fall into place.
Yeah. Agree. I agree. I mean, I that really just struck a lot of chords in the right way, because I remember, coming across this quote saying that we are actually beings that feel more than we think. We're not. That is important, because at the end of the day, yes, we think logically. That's what separates us. But you know, a big part of us is feelings as well. And I think we shouldn't forget that, right? And you talk about how he would just stop and ask how you are. I have this very story I don't think I have told you before. Was really that I was literally during one time, right? I was just having conversations with a few team members, and they literally cornered me, sat me down, and said, "How are you feeling?" And then I gave them some politically correct answer, and like just trying to brush them aside and all that kind of stuff, which probably you're very familiar with. They followed up with a question and said, "No, how are you really, really feeling?"
Yep.
I almost wanted to cry. And these are coming from people that are so-called below in terms of the hierarchy with me. And that just reminded me of, the core of, what we are doing, right? In terms of, we're not just, yes, we should be excited about what we're building. We should be excited about the impact that we're about to create and all the achievements. But I feel like the greater calling is really to wherever you are, to build that community of people like you. I use the word community word very loosely, to build that community of people that enjoys working with one another for the same purpose, right? Because I think we spend a lot of our waking hours working, and it's important for us to make sure we take care of the person behind what we see, as you said, right? So I can't thank you enough for that story to kind of validate my own experience in terms of, you know, how important that is and the core of it as well. Um, yeah, I think, you know, we're kind of like close to the hour, and I know that you probably have to rush off. One last question, and this probably put you on the spot, right? Um, we probably spoke about this, and you know, I felt like all the things that we talked about in the probably past 10-15 minutes lead to this question, which is, you know, if you need to distill, I guess, your guiding principle or life philosophy into one single sentence. I know you don't like to just put one to it, but if I were to kind of really force you into maybe just giving you a bonus lah, two sentences instead of one sentence or a mantra, right? What would that be, right? As you know, because you've gone through a lot, and now you're in a new country as well, new chapter of your life. I'm just curious in terms of what would that be like, you know, in terms of your life philosophy moving forward or guiding principle moving forward.
I'm glad you gave me the second companion statement.
Yeah.
You know, okay. I thought a little bit about this, and I didn't get very far because it's a hard question.
It's a hard question for sure, right?
You know, in the end, a few words jumped out
Yeah.
at me, which is do what matters. Do what matters to you. And that can be defined as, you know, we don't have to go into it in many different ways, and then very, very broad ways and not just narrow ways. And you know, let me just get to my accompanying statement first. Which, this is a piece of advice I got actually coming out of Berkeley doing my MBA. Adapt the statement a little bit, which is it's helpful to see life as a checkerboard. This was adapted from ex senior classmate about these, you know, because I was trying to get into the social impact space and trying to figure all that out. And they said, you know, see your career as a checkerboard, not just linear. Sometimes you go sideways, sometimes you jump into adjacent fields, or maybe even seemingly unrelated fields. Sometimes you go backwards a little bit to take a slightly different step forward, because those experiences make you a better and a richer person trying to arrive at that, whatever that end goal is, versus always, you know, I think for many of us and in many of the societies we come from, you're taught to see life as linear. You know, there's just a rung, and you keep going up the ladder, and you keep chasing it, and you keep chasing it, and you get stuck. You don't really know where to turn. And you know what? In reality, life isn't like that. You know, and even if life were relatively, like, say, a career you pick is relatively well-defined function and it can be straightforward, you know, a checkerboard experience, I think, would make you more valuable as a person, because it brings alternative perspectives as well. So I'd say, yeah, you know, ultimately life is short. I say that a lot. Do what matters, and it really, it's not a straight line. It's a checkerboard, and you know, I think that makes life a bit more fun, no?
Yeah, it does. It definitely does. I mean, like, I mean, to kind of add to that is like you can always see the checkerboard as a dynamic one, because life is dynamic, right? You can always add pieces to it, right? That's always gonna be the playing field expands as you allow it to expand as well, right? So that's what makes it exciting as well. Yeah. Thanks for that, Pin. It's been such a pleasure, and I wish we could go on a little bit longer when it comes to the conversation as well. So thank you so much for being on the show. Thanks, Pin.
You know, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to just talk about all this. I mean, this is a, you know, sort of really great reflection of life, right? And you know, this conversation, I'm sure, will help me going forward as well. I'll keep you posted on that.
I'm looking forward to speak to you again the next time as well. Who knows that this is not the first time you're going to be on here.
Right.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Ben. Thank you.
Okay. Goodbye.